to my talk, Growing an Ecosystem, Lessons that I Learned. A disclaimer, everything I say in this talk is purely subjective, and when taken out of context, it can not serve you well, so do whatever you want with it. But these are the lessons that I learned during the existence of Babashka. So what is the Babashka ecosystem? What do I mean? Let's define this. At the core, I think there is the BB binary. And then we have the built-in libraries that are inside of the BB binary. Clojure star, Babashka star, Cheshire, HTTP kit, and the list goes on. Then we have the external libraries, tools, command line tools, and pods that you can define in BB Eden, eBin, and Neil, and FS Watcher pod. So all the things that are not built in, but you can load in Babashka. But mostly, oh no, sorry. And also libraries coming out of developing Babashka that are not like necessarily, well, they are now part of Babashka, but initially they weren't designed to be part of the Babashka binary, but they came out of developing Babashka as a side effect, let's say. So I consider them part of the Babashka ecosystem. But what I enjoy most about the whole Babashka ecosystem is the people who contribute to and use Babashka and that I interact with on a daily basis, and we're all here today, and that's amazing. So what's the BB binary? Well, you may know it by now, but this is the main idea of Babashka. You give it a closure expression or a file or a script or a project, and you execute it, and it's faster than what you're used to with JVM closure. And it should be roughly the same feeling as when you're writing a bash script. That's where the name comes from. So one lesson that I learned, this is the first lesson, and there will be many lessons in this talk. The first lesson, I think what helped Babashka was use a unique, memorable name. So when you search for your project on Google or DuckDuckGo or whatever, and you type closure and then the name of your project, it should come up as an obvious thing. So if you use a generic word, it might not be a good idea. Even if the name is weird, that's okay. Maybe weirder is more okay, because a lot of people wonder what does Babashka even mean. I'm still not sure myself, but even when you get people thinking about a name, that's a good idea, because then they'll memorize it, right? And also you get these speculations. Yeah, it's about this Russian grandma that well, no, it's not that. So my experience has also been, if the name doesn't stick after 2 days, then change it. I've also had other projects that I named like terrible names, and then I changed it after, maybe only after 6 weeks, but already after 2 days I knew this name isn't going to work. Just change it. And okay, when your tool starts to become an ecosystem, then the other names in your ecosystem can become more boring, like babashka.fs, babashka.process, and whatever, as long as you have this memorable prefix. Another lesson that I learned was let other people do what they're good at. So, for example, Nikita, he offered to do the logos of Babashka and Sail Giocondo, and to this day they are, I think, one of the best logos that I've seen for open source projects. And I can say this because I didn't make them myself. Yeah, thank you, Nikita. And so more in general, like when you want to have an ecosystem growing, you should be facilitating people who have talents to, let them use those talents in favor of your tools, right? I'm not going to name all these people, and also when you're not among these people, it doesn't mean that you're not contributing and you're not talented. Let's be clear about that. But it's a limited slide, so okay. So early on in the life cycle of when Babashka got started, I had a little bit of a vision that consisted of these goals. The Babashka binary should be fast starting, it should be easy installable, because who is going to use a tool that's not easily installable? It should be familiar in the sense that if you know Clojure, you already know most of Babashka. So the target audience, for me it was Clojure developers. Cross-platform, I didn't want to deal with Bash-like scripts that didn't run on Windows, for example. So that's the nice thing that I think Java got right, that it's an abstraction that works on any operating system. And that's what I also wanted to see in Babashka. Well, what's maybe unique about Babashka compared to other scripting tools is that it's easy to use multi-threading and interop with nice classes that you're used to, and there's batteries included. Like, you shouldn't be pulling in a whole lot of ceremony if you want to write a script to move some files around or read a JSON response from some web server. So that's another lesson that I learned. Clearly define what your project is about. And at least those were my personal goals. And later on, maybe when other people join your, let's say, sub-community, those goals could maybe change. But this is what I thought Babashka was about. And it also defines what it's not about. So Babashka is not like a Bash shell replacement, for example. It's only Bash, the programming language, that I wanted to replace, and not like it's not you're dropping into some terminal thing and then it's an alternative for that. No, because I thought, well, people will never change their shell. Maybe they will change from Bash to Fish or Bash to ZHH, but that's it. So you cannot. Okay, that was my assumption. So Bash is like the host system, or Windows command.exe or whatever, and so work where people are in that moment, and yeah, that's what Babashka is. It also helps you manage the expectations. Someone comes along, yeah, can we maybe add this and that? Well, that's not what Babashka is about, so we're not doing that currently, or you know. And it also helps you prioritize what you're spending time on. Well, that's kind of obvious, I think. And also the other things, like performance was not an initial goal as long as it was about as fast as Bash. That was okay for me. But later on, I started to care more about that. But I pushed that like 2 years after the initial version of Babashka, more or less. So focus initially on those more important goals, I would say. Okay, small history of Babashka. This slide is very bad to read in the back. I know that. Just listen to me ramble and that. Okay, so in August 2019, it was the first release of Babashka. And it mostly came from wanting to replace a tool that I already had. It was called Jet. And it doesn't completely replace it, but it's an improvement on that, because Jet lets you transform a data structure to something else using a Clojure expression. It was an alternative to JQ, let's say, but for Clojure people. But the query language didn't fully support Clojure, and I wanted to improve that. So I wrote a Clojure interpreter that ran inside a binary. That's basically how Babashka was started. Then 2 days later I decided, well, this interpreter that I'm writing, that could be useful on its own. So that became Psy very early on. And it was really small. It was just 1 page of code, so I call it the small Clojure interpreter. It's not that small anymore. And then a few days later, I split out the parser library. I needed a name, and I thought, Edamame, yeah, that makes sense. So then, okay, and this was funny, because in the same month that I launched Babashka, then someone came and said, can I use this with the socket repo, with inf Clojure, to write little scripts? And this wasn't something that I anticipated, because I just wanted to use it like as I was using Jet to transform stuff using a line of Clojure, and then. But this guy came, and what I liked about it he posed a challenge to me that I didn't expect, but it was fun to work on this and as a way to learn more about how does a socket wrapper work, let's say. So I like that. That was it was something that came, an idea from someone else. Okay, a few months in, then somebody wanted to rebind the out dynamic var, and there were no dynamic vars, so I started creating vars. So I started very small, and then I added, over time, I added more things to make it look more like Clojure. Then, this is funny because we're now almost 5 months or so in, and only then I included Cheshire because, yeah, JSON, it's pretty obvious that you need JSON, but still it took a couple of months. And why did I wait? Because I wanted to be sure that you would need this library because it added 2 or 3 megabytes to the binary, and if people kept requesting things, then it would grow very fast. What I wanted to know sure is what I'm adding, is that useful for the long term? And well, okay, JSON, okay, whatever. Yeah, we need that. It's pretty obvious now, but it might not be obvious in the beginning when you're just creating this tool, right? The Java time package is available in Babashka. There's a couple of choices that you can make here. Do I include a Clojure library that wraps Java time, or to have a nice interface? But there are like 10 of those, and which one do I choose? Or do I just expose the raw materials that people can use themselves? And actually, the Java time API is not that bad. So I decided to first add that and then wait for a little bit longer to see what was the obvious choice to maybe wrap like a Clojure wrapper around it. And still, until this day, there is no Clojure time wrapper in Babashka because working with Java time in Babashka is okay. And still the people haven't settled on one, this is the de facto time library. So that's a hard choice to make. It's actually the same with JSON. What JSON library do you choose? Because maybe today I would choose Clojure data JSON, but back then it was not so performant. And I knew that Cheshire works very, very well with the GraalVM tooling, etc. So, and also there were lots of libraries that depended on Cheshire. So if I included Cheshire, those libraries would also work in Babashka. So that's how these decisions come about. So in December, I decided to port the Clojure bash script. You know, when you type in your shell CLJ, the official Clojure command line tool, I decided to port it to Clojure to see if I could run it with Babashka, the interpreter, just as an exercise of porting some bash to Clojure. I didn't know that later on this would also become a library, but I was pretty excited then that Babashka could run this code.
Christmas Day.
Yeah. Oh, was it? Oh. Oh my God. Okay. It's that obvious, isn't it? Okay, I included Clojure test. This is nice, so you can write, unit tests for your scripts. Who writes unit tests for their bash scripts? And yeah, a few people, but it's not that common, and I think it's a good practice to have this in the scripting ecosystem. And then only in January, the first version supporting Windows came, and this also had to do with having the right CI environment and also the support from GraalVM for Windows. But actually, now a lot of people are using Babashka on Windows because this lets them write scripts that run on their system, but also on everyone else who is using Mac, and a few people who are using Linux. Okay, and then in February, I met this guy, Stefan, at the Clojure D, where I gave my first talk about. So we're only a half year in now, the first semester of Babashka, let's say. Yeah, that's a picture of me then. So what lesson did I learn from the first semester? This is my personal way of doing things. Publish it early, the minimal viable product. It has a risk of putting people off, like, okay, it doesn't do this and it's bad, and they will maybe look at it only 3 years later. But usually I cannot control myself and publish it anyway. So that's just how I roll. But also it gives people a chance to early on give feedback, and you can write the enthusiasm of those people to bring your project further. It was already better than the Jet query language, so I felt it was good to already publish it as a minimal tool. Also, it lets you early on gather already some feedback about what stuff could be useful to include in Babashka, and yeah, I think it's very important to collect this data over time, especially because in the Clojure ecosystem we're used to not making any breaking changes, and so if I include something in Babashka and remove it later on and people depend on it, that's not great, right? And also, is the more ambitious take worth the effort? For example, I didn't have vars, I didn't have macros. Yeah, later on it turned out to be worth the effort, but I could push that into the future. And this I already said. So I'll continue with the small history of Babashka. So nREPL server came part of Babashka. And as we saw today, you can also run the libraries that are in Babashka with the normal nREPL. So maybe, I don't know, if we really had to include this, because you can just use the JVM. But again, this was also a nice challenge that I didn't know much about nREPL, and this was also a way for me to learn what it was all about, right? And still it has benefits that you can, yeah, that you can quickly spin up an nREPL and evaluate stuff, of course. So YAML, somebody managed to convince me to include YAML in Babashka. That's still a miracle, I would say. No, but we have to deal with this format on a daily basis. It's just part of our life, and we can quickly transform it to Eden or from Eden and then live our lives again, right? And okay, XML, yeah, I understand that. In May 2020, Babashka Pods was born, and this is an extension mechanism for Babashka that is different than writing libraries. I won't go into detail, but it allows new use cases for that, because it's a closed world thing. This allows you to use it more flexibly. Datafy, HTTP kit. So, and now we're entering a phase that we're adding more and more convenience libraries to Babashka. So, only 10 minutes? Well, I have 40 minutes, you know. Yeah. This is only my third slide. So yeah, we're now in the phase that we're adding more convenience things to Babashka. So the basic idea is there, and now it's just adding more stuff to it, but still being careful about what exactly do we need. Yeah. So BB Eden is a convenient way to include libraries for your Babashka project. We didn't have this initially. It was just, Babashka initially just had a way to say, this is the class path, and it's up to you how you calculate the class path. So with SailJ or with lining or whatever. And then only a year later, no, we're already 1.5 years in now, there was a BB Eden file born, where you could specify libraries similar to depth Eden. But then the thought occurred, well, now that we have a configuration file, what else can we put in there? And I didn't like makefiles, so 1 and 1 is 2. Then BB Eden also got the task support to have a makefile-like system. And another convenience library, adding more stuff. Yeah, basically the rest is just adding more stuff and being very careful about what goes in and what doesn't go in. What we're also seeing is more compatibility. This is the last half year or so. More compatibility with, or the last year, more compatibility with existing Clojure libraries, because by now Babashka has a lot of built-in Java classes that people regularly use, and this opens the door for libraries that just run with Babashka as is. Also, yeah, so there is the bbin tool. This is also nice. It lets you install scripts as global file system utilities, similar to npm install -g, let's say. I initially wanted to include this in Babashka, but I had these thoughts that I wrote down, but I wasn't sure about exactly some decisions. And somebody asked me, yeah, can we please move forward with this? And I said, well, I'm not sure, I'm not done with my thinking process, but maybe you can make a tool in user space that does this. And then we can try it out, try ideas out. And when we make breaking changes in user space, it's maybe less of an issue than having this in BB. And that's what bbin became. I still want to include something like this in the future in BB, but it's fine as a separate tool right now. And it taught us a lot about what to do and what not to do. Later on, the details of closure compatibility were filled in more for compatibility with other libraries as well. Moving on. So one lesson that I learned from this 3.5 years, I think now over 3.5 years of Babashka, it takes time for a tool to get adopted. So in January 2020, Babashka had almost 400 stars and on GitHub. And I wondered, like, okay, SailDiacondo has 400 stars. Why isn't Babashka more popular than SailDiacondo? And then now it has twice the amount of stars as SailDiacondo. So it just takes a long time for people to adopt it. I'm still meeting new people monthly or so that have been long-time Clojurians that just tried out Babashka for the first time. So it can take 3, maybe 4 years before you reach most of the people. So, yeah. All right. So performance, this was a later concern for me. First, I was happy if the interpreter was as fast as Bash, or roughly. And there was also another closure interpreter around. It was called Joker. And as long as it was faster than that, I was also happy. But then later on, I saw some low-hanging fruit to improve things. And now this has really become a concern because the interpreter is used not only in Babashka but also in other environments that performance is more of an issue. So now it has become a primary goal to make it as fast as possible, given the constraints that the environment brings. So for example, this is a loop that does 10 million times. It increments a number and decrements a number until one of the numbers is 0. And this takes now 500 something milliseconds on my MacBook, this MacBook M1. But if we compare it to Python, Python takes on the same machine 800 something milliseconds. So it's already faster than Python. While the interpreter, it's mostly worked on by, one person and with contributors, of course. But how many people have worked on Python? I mean, that's quite a lot more, I think. So I hope Guido sees this and then thinks I should make it faster. And then I have another challenge. But okay, but I didn't start out that way. So the same loop, this was the first date that this loop actually ran in Babashka, because maybe the loop form didn't even work in the initial version. So around July 2020 or something, it took 16,000 milliseconds. And I was able to bring it down by changing several stuff. But by focusing on this example all the way down to this 991 number. This is on a Linux machine which runs a little bit slower than this Linux AMD machine. So I measured this all on the same Linux machine because I didn't have M1 binaries that went back that far. And one thing that I would like to focus on is, so one thing that was made faster, it was one of the last things, is how bindings are accessed. And here, can you see my cursor? So in this is a simplified version. So here we have bindings. The binding symbol A is set to 1, and the binding with symbol B is set to 2. And then we execute this 10 million times, or 100 million times, I don't know. But this is basically what happens when you run this in Psi, at least before. So you execute the function plus, and then you get the binding under symbol A, and then you get the binding symbol B. And this takes 2200 milliseconds. But what can we do to improve the performance? Well, I tried several things, and I disliked the idea of using a mutable thing, because Babashka supports multi-threading, so I thought if I use mutable things, that's kind of dangerous. So the naive thing to try is to replace get with the direct Java interrupt, .get, and that wins you a little bit. But actually in GraalVM it didn't even matter, in GraalVM native image, because that was clever enough that it optimized this already. What you can also do is use a map with keywords instead of symbols. That makes it like 3 times faster. And then what you can do, okay, let's just for sake of argument try a mutable hash map, Java util hash map. And that takes 500, it's a little bit better, but not that much. But the way faster solution is to use an object array and then pre-allocate an array that has the exact amount of things that you need, and then you pre-calculate that local A is on this first index and local B is on the second index, and then when I execute it I look up the binding by this index that I pre-calculated. And this is actually an idea that came from another project. So this was on my radar, but I didn't know exactly how I should implement this. But this idea with the array and the indexes, this came from a project called UCLJ by Janos Erdos, and he's also there back in the audience. And he showed how to do it. So he made a small interpreter, like also 1,000 lines or so, and he had this idea which made the local access much faster. And so I could just learn from his project and also implement this in Psi. So this is just a lesson that I learned. Look at what other people are doing. It's kind of obvious, but yeah, still. And okay, that's a photo of the guy who's over there. All right, so another lesson that's unrelated to the performance is sharing your struggles with other people. So I was struggling with, shall I quit my job maybe, because I might have just enough sponsors to get by, to work more on this open source tooling, which is like a flourishing ecosystem. That, at least that's what I'd like to think. And should I maybe quit my job or not? And so this was on my mind a lot 2 years ago. And so I talked to several people about this. And if you don't share this with other people, you're also not giving people a chance to help you out or exchange thoughts. So it's just good to even, you don't have to post it on Twitter, but you can maybe also find people elsewhere to get feedback. But by actually sharing this thought on Twitter, Rome Research reached out to me, and then they became a sponsor, which didn't give me an excuse anymore to say, okay, now I don't have enough to not quit my job anymore. And then also Closure is Together came at around in the same month with the long-term funding. And also I spoke to Martin of Next Journal, and he offered that I could also work for them a little bit, like on the border of open source and their stuff. So this combination, that actually was the tipping point for me to actually quit my previous job and more or less do full-time open source. And I like to think that this helps the ecosystem, because yeah, I can spend a lot of time on other people's pull requests as well, and just facilitate them more as well, right? And so thanks to all the sponsors who are sponsoring my open source. Without them, I just can't spend that much time on this. So another lesson learned, decomplect, yeah, there we have the word again, into libraries. If I didn't decomplect Babashka into Psi, Edamame, and depclj, then I wouldn't have the unanticipated success of Psi, for example, on the JavaScript platform, because Psi early on, it was pretty easy to make it a SailJC project, and I kept doing this with every change that I added. And now Psi on JavaScript, it's used in NBB, Skiddle, Joyride, Clerk, Portal, and some other projects. And this is not something that I saw coming initially when I started this small command line thing. And things keep growing from there, because the use of Psi in the JS platform gave me another idea of making a more performant, like small ClojureScript compiler, which is now being used in some other projects. So yeah, the lesson is pull things apart into components, because people might have use cases for those components that you had not foreseen yourself. All right, so NBB, Babashka. There's even people fighting with like which one you should use, NBB or Babashka, and it's, yeah, funny. So you just use them both. Okay, okay, so another lesson. Quality, the quality of the software. Add a lot of tests and don't make any breaking changes. Duh. So Babashka CI, it runs new Babashka commits on about 100 libraries from the Clojure ecosystem. Every time I make a change to the interpreter, or I add something to the configuration or whatever, to check regressions. Because if I mess up, like if I swap the then and the else, there are several libraries that will fall over, and it will become very obvious to me that I messed something up. And also, it's my personal opinion that it's nice to avoid breaking changes even before the 1.0 release, but it depends a little bit on how much your library is used. For example, Edamame, I have some things in there, some defaults that I'm not really happy with. Like it has the instead of line metadata, it has row, and while Clojure uses line keyword. I would have liked to change this, but enough people were already using Edamame pre 1.0 that I didn't want to change this anymore. And a useful tool actually to see if people are using your open source projects is grep.app, which you can fill in some code, some expression, and then you will see the open source projects that are using your libraries. Yeah, and also clearly demarcate the public API from the internal API early on, because yeah, it just lets you be experimental in this internal API while not breaking other users. So very early on I already made psi.core as the only public namespace for public API, and then there is psi.impl. Impl means implementation detail. And I also learned that impl is not clear enough, so now I'm using the word internal, because people were still using the impl namespaces, and that's, yeah, not okay. So a bit, yeah, funny thing. So the Babashka binary size, how much does it matter? Maybe it doesn't matter so much to most people, but it also correlates with the compile time of Babashka, and that matters to me. How long CI takes to produce a new version of Babashka. So I would like to keep this as small as possible. Yeah, and okay, here we can see that here we were in a phase early in the history that things got added and added and added, and since July 2 years ago, it's more or less the size is more or less stable, and so maybe Babashka is more or less done. There will be added things very slowly now, and not as fast as in the beginning. All right, so this is a lesson that I learned. If you can incubate in user space, because then I don't have to add this to the Babashka binary, and I don't have to carry it forward for, yeah, I don't know how Babashka long it will last, of course, but yeah, it's just a waste of CPU cycles if I have to compile libraries that are part of Babashka that nobody uses. So also maintenance burden, if you can push like bbin, if I can push that out into user space for a while, I can let it grow over there and not deal with problems in Babashka itself. Another example of this is, so some people were using for instaparse to become part of Babashka, but to delay this, I wrote instaparse as a pod. And you can more or less use it the same way as you can use instaparse on the JVM. but instead it's an external thing for now, and it lets us think more about, do we really need this in Babashka? Closure spec alpha, yeah, I don't know, it's still alpha, although I don't know, is spec 2 ever coming? But so what I did here, it is part of Babashka, but only as text, and it's interpreted just in time before you require the namespace. This lets me save space until the spec 2 comes out, and then it will be the more efficient precompiled built-in. nREPL, as we saw today, you can also just use the JVM REPL and then run with Babashka afterwards. So should we include all this middleware, nREPL middleware stuff, should we include this in Babashka or maybe not? And maybe it's just fine to use the JVM tooling until you then run it with Babashka afterwards, and this will save binary space. Okay, one last slide, I hope. Productivity. Some people wonder, how can it be that you're creating so many libraries? Okay, I'll share all my secrets now. Always have 2 projects going on, so if you procrastinate on one project, you can do that on your other project, and vice versa. Another thing is, some issues don't come in isolation, so some people are talking about certain features in 1 week, and then you hear somebody else talking about this feature or a related feature, and then suddenly you're in kind of a zone of a certain topic that you address, and then you can address like maybe 5 issues in the same week, and then you have this mental, yeah, you're more, yeah, so it overlaps and it's more efficient that way. So if you're not having so much energy, it helps to have a list of boring, easy chores that you can still do even if you have the flu or something and you're laying on the couch and watching Netflix all day, and you can still maybe do one boring thing to get a green box on GitHub. And this is my secret weapon. It's the corn waffles from this specific brand. It's only for sale in Albert Heijn supermarket in the Netherlands. And this is what I eat to get productive. Okay, yeah, I think I ran out of time, didn't I? So, okay, I'll give a summary of the slide. Before you create a pull request, write an issue because it helps you think about the problem. And I think thinking before coding is a good idea. Okay? And then this is a question that I get a lot. I'm new to Clojure and I want to contribute to open source libraries. I tell them I recommend working on the tools that you use yourself and identifying the pain points for yourself. Scratch your own itch. Thank you.